And really, feel free to fill in this front row. Like, we don't have a super huge crowd, so we can kind of pack it in a little bit so we're near each other. That would be cool. I'm going to go ahead and just do an intro for Startup Grind and welcome everyone. And I'll read a bio of Evan because there's a lot there. It's a brief bio, but so just want to say a little bit about Startup Grind. Welcome, thank you for coming. So it's a monthly event series focused on educating, inspiring, and connecting entrepreneurs. It's a global organization. Actually, just this week, they hit 300 chapters worldwide. So it's truly global. And their goal, I don't know if they've hit it yet, is to have 200 events this month. So they have like this SG200 hashtag that they're promoting. And Austin is one of those 200. So, but anyway, that's the goal of the event, and that those values resonate with me. It's why I'm involved. I like connecting people. I like teaching people what I know, and then finding really smart people to come in and share their experiences with us as well. So really pleased to have Evan here tonight. I want to thank Atlassian, who's sponsoring us this evening. It's an enterprise software company. Lots of cool tools. They have Stride out now, which is kind of a Slack competitor. It's a pretty new product. And they are a great supporter of the Austin startup ecosystem, and they're a supporter of ours, so really appreciate them supporting us. So yeah, that's the gist of it. Has anybody been to Startup Grind before? 2? Was it in Austin or was it somewhere else? Here? Okay, well.
At the end, we'll ask you if this one was better.
There will be a quiz at the end. Yeah, there were some people here last month. One guy was visiting from India, and another guy had been to one out in California, so it was cool. People just come to visit, and Startup Grind is like a touch point for people. So, all right, so here we go. I'm going to read Evan's bio here.
Please, short. So embarrassing.
I kept it short. But it does take up this whole card. Evan is the co-founder of Able, an online lender to small businesses, which launched in 2014. Able serves the Fortune 5 million, air quotes, the 5.8 million businesses which form the backbone of the economy. His previous startup was Outbox, a consumer internet company aiming to take over the US Postal Service. Small goal. And was backed by venture capitalists Peter Thiel and Mike Maples. And he's also the co-author of GetBacked, Craft Your Story, and Build the Perfect Pitch Deck, and Launch the Venture of Your Dreams. And that was from Harvard University Press, 2015. And that was also co-authored with Evan Loomis, who's also an Austin entrepreneur. Yeah, and it hit Amazon #1 in business new releases at the time that it released. So, is that fairly bio? It's somewhat some short bio. There's more, but I won't go into it.
I am thankful. This is good. Let's dive in.
So we are going to have a conversation up here, and I have some topics, and then we also want to give you guys a chance to ask questions too at the end. So that's the format. Is we'll go through a conversation, and our goal is to educate and inspire. Basically, get his stories, get some things he has to teach us, things he's learned during his entrepreneurial career. He's pretty much dedicated a good part of his life to entrepreneurship since he's been working professionally. And so he's got the entrepreneurial bug. And he is also here in Austin with us. So I want to talk to him some about that, what the Austin scene has to offer, where, what challenges we have and things like that, so we can be better. So anywho, that's the gist of it. Let me get started here. All right, so just to get started and say hello to everyone, could you tell us a little bit about your background, kind of where you came from, and how where you grew up kind of shaped who Evan Baehr became?
I feel like I'm on a couch, laying down. What was your childhood like? So, thanks for being here. It's fun to hang out, and I hope we get a chance to hear questions in your stories also. I already know mine, so I learn more when I stop talking. So, born and raised in Pensacola, Florida. It's in northern Florida. The only business person I knew growing up was the owner of a local car dealership. So, my dad was a physician. We knew lots of lawyers and lots of doctors, and I just assumed that business meant selling cars. I didn't like selling cars, so I didn't like business. And it was, 8 years later after college, I ended up at this 4-hour dinner with Peter Thiel, where he kind of persuaded me about why things like law are silly vocations, and the way to change the world is to build companies. And I was like, that's a really interesting argument. And I started thinking a lot about it and concluded with him that actually, if your goal is to change the world, you should do it by building companies, not by trying to touch direct things like law or public policy or even directly the world of ideas. Elon Musk is not an author. I mean, he may write books, but the way that you beget ideas and change in the world is through the building of for-profit companies. And in this day and age, it's largely technology companies that are venture-backed that can do that stuff at massive scale. So anyway, I feel it's not quite like Elle Woods, but I definitely took my wife, who is a Manhattanite, Upper East Sider, down. The tradition in my hometown is to have drinks over Thanksgiving at the the Wisteria. It's a double-wide trailer in northern Pensacola. And I took my wife, my then girlfriend there, and she was like, do you really come here? Is this a real thing? So anyway, when I go back, I probably years ago stopped being able to explain to my parents and all my high school friends what I do, because it just, the vocations are so, they just have no idea. The one silly one was a TechCrunch article ran, and it was raised $10 million Series A or something, and this high school friend posted on Facebook, and he was like, dude, what are you going to do with $10 million of cash? And I'm like, I'm going to die. I'm just going to work all the time. I didn't actually get $10 million of cash. It goes into the company, and then you have to work really hard to, hopefully that turns into something one day. So anyway, I was not born into this at all and had a kind of strange path to get there.
Gotcha. So I didn't touch on your bio, but you do have degrees from several universities that some people may have heard of.
Phoenix Online, it's a great iPad app. It's accessible
Harvard, Princeton,
everywhere.
Yale. So just if you could, looking back to that time in your life, what have you taken from that experience that you use in everyday life and entrepreneurship? Are there lessons to be learned? Are there things that you took with you?
Well, so the three. So undergrad at Princeton was in the Wilson School, which is a school of public policy. I went to Yale to go to divinity school and study Islamic theology and law, and then I went to business school at Harvard with a bunch of people that are on a 2-year vacation from Goldman, and we're going to go right back to Goldman. And what did I learn? I mean, I think generally I am a believer in liberal arts educations. To sit and have to learn Greek for a year is just brutal. And I don't even remember any of it, and it doesn't help me on a daily basis, but I think something happened in your brain where you just get smarter, or learn how to consume lots of difficult, obtuse information quickly. So I am a little bit nervous about, there's a lot about what Peter does, it's great. Most of the people that did the Thiel Fellowship never raised any money for ventures, because there is some element of the socialization process of going to college, I think, that's good for some people. And so, anyway, so I think it was great to learn how to think. I mean, I might carry that with me. But honestly, a lot of Peter in 0 to 1, which if you guys have not read it, it's a fantastic book and speaks to a lot of the cultural zeitgeist of elite education world right now. And he has so many devastating, great lines in the book. One of them is that all Rhodes Scholars had a great future in their past. And what he means by that, he like studies them, and like most of them are like partners at law firms or consulting firms. And I mean, in the grand scheme of things, those are amazing jobs that pay a ton of money and have a lot of influence. But for the kind of stuff that Peter's talking about, it's people that want to have all these doors open in their life. And so you end up, you know, the only job you can imagine coming out of law school is to like work doing corporate law for big companies. Or the only job you can do coming out of business school is like go be a management consultant. And Peter's really sad that that's kind of the reality. So yeah, I fought that off a lot. Not going to McKinsey after undergrad was like, I really felt like a failure. Not going back to Facebook after business school was like, are you really wasting your life doing this thing? So I think the social norms at a lot of those places are actually really unhealthy. It leads you to take really conservative vocational choices. So I escaped. I'm glad I did it. I mean, I guess I learned something.
I like it. It kind of segues into something I wanted to talk about. It has to do with how do you decide what to work on? Because you know, Peter in 0 to 1 is always kind of arguing that we should tackle these really big problems and not wasting our time on anything else. It sounds similar to the argument you were making about how people spend their careers. So I was wondering if you have thoughts, and you've done it a couple times now with your companies, but how do you figure out what's worth spending time on?
Oh man, this is tough. Well, one thing that rings true here is there was a talk I went to at business school, and it was a second-year student who had been a PM at like maybe Expedia or something, and was sort of like one of the second years helping like people figure out how to get into startups. And he had an approach for like coming up with ideas, and he showed us this database, and he had like come up with like 200 ideas and like ranked all of them on all these different criteria, and then he like sorted them by some like matrixed assessment, and like that was how he decided what to do. And I don't know that there are wrong approaches to like coming up with what you want to work on, but everyone knows the concept of a product market fit. I do think there's something around a founder company fit, which like a guy I saw earlier today is building Standard Cyborg. It is a modern day prosthetics company, and he has a prosthetic leg. I would not have founder company fit in starting that company. I mean, not only do I not understand it, but like I have no rationale for building that company. So I think there's some organic, hard to figure out approach which would lead you to be very myopically focused and zealous about a certain area. And I think it's that, yes, there are filters like, can it make money? Has someone else done it? Is it illegal? Do you need $1 billion tomorrow to even have, I mean, I guess there's some practical things you should think about, but gosh, I think most filters are going to make the idea look stupid. That's kind of the nature of that you're starting something new. And it kind of comes down to like, are you just, like, can you not stop thinking about it? And if it's anywhere shy of that, where you're trying to like persuade yourself through some matrix model, like the right thing to work on, it feels a little bit more like maybe you're trying too hard. Might be a little bit harsh. There's a book that's not my normal style of book, but it's called, let's see. It started with a Medium post. You guys may know this. Help me think of it. The book, it printed, it's on Amazon, it's beautiful, and it's like cardboard, and all the illustrations are done in paper, the 53 Signals illustration app, and it's called, it started as a Medium post, it got a gazillion reviews, and the whole theory is stop shoulding yourself. And the theory is like she unpacks her life and all these people, parents, spouse, neighbors, all these people kept piling on all these things. You should do this, you should do this, you should do this. And kind of the core question in the book is like, what must you do? How do you figure out what must you do? And she has some exercises in the book that are kind of interesting, like observing, if you're not someone who already has this thing that you can't stop thinking about, there's an interesting question, well, how do you get there? And so she has these like journaling exercises where it's like, if you took 100 days, Sheryl Sandberg, boss at Facebook, would ask this question a lot. She said, the Facebook product platform question that we're trying to ask is, on a daily basis, what parts of your day would be dramatically better if they were social? So this is 10 years ago. So it was like your commute, going to sporting events, listening to music. It was like basic things. What things would be better if they were social? Just like start journaling. Anyway, there's a bunch of cool journaling exercises in this book that may help unearth for you what are those things you kind of can't not do. It's a pretty high bar, though. What can't you not do? But I think it's worthwhile thinking about.
Yeah, that's obviously the best. I think a lot of people just want to be entrepreneurs, and they start because they want to do that, and they come up with some idea, but they don't have that founder fit.
Yeah.
And it makes it a lot harder.
Yeah, and that's I think that's just a tough place to start from if it's like, I am a decent developer and I want to be an entrepreneur. Well, why do you want to do that? Amazon Cloud and other advances in technology make it a lot easier to have a shot at that. We could be at a place where, our cultural icons are entrepreneurs, and it's possible. I don't know the data, but it's possible that there are people starting companies that should not be starting companies. So I guess I would say if you're anywhere shy of I have to do this, then maybe it's not that you shouldn't be an entrepreneur, but it might just be like you're building a different kind of business. Just like there are lots of ways to build businesses and make money and not have to go work at a big company.
A lot of the businesses that Able has funded, are these small businesses that employ, like you were saying, a lot of America.
Right. Yeah.
So let's go back a bit to Outbox.
Yeah.
And I just want, in case anyone doesn't know or everyone doesn't know, I want you to give a quick summary of what it is, but then also how did it come to be, and then maybe some lessons you took from that experience.
Yeah. How did it come to be, or how did it die in flames?
Both.
Both. Okay.
But first of all, how did you guys?
How did it start?
Yeah. How did you come up with this?
Yeah. So let's see. I worked at Facebook before business school. I was going to go back to Facebook. I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I thought I built a company before that, but I just thought working at Facebook would give me exposure to lots of really smart people, build great relationships with a lot of engineers, and that was the plan. A good friend of mine, Will Davis, was at business school. We hung out all the time, and it was second year, and he was just vomiting all these ideas, and they were terrible. And we have a list of all these ideas. They were so bad. And he has a particular knack for bad names of the companies, or especially funny how poorly they were named. And there's a professor there named Clayton Christopher who coined the phrase disruptive innovation, but his first book is, well, he's written a gazillion books, but there's The Innovator's Dilemma, which is sort of the most famous book. But then his second book is actually Mike Maples Jr., Austin legend, board member for us. One of Mike's favorite books is the second book, which is The Innovator's Solution, and it's actually how do you drive company strategy given the reality of competing with large incumbents. It's an amazing book. If you're not going to read it, the one exercise you should do from it is when you're starting a company, you have to create a list of 100 assumptions that you have about the company, things that must be true. And then you have to ask about each of those 100. The first 50 are easy, but the next 50 are actually really hard. So once you list the 100, you have to rank them into green, yellow, red. And red is an assumption that if it is not true, is the end of your company. Yellow is it's pretty bad, and green is it doesn't really matter. And then Christensen would argue the way you should spend your time in terms of what products you ship, what experiments you run, is you should strategically tackle each of the red colored hypotheses first, instead of tackling the green ones. It's a really, Mike advises all of his companies to go through that exercise. It's really cool. Anyway, so we really like the theories of disruptive innovation. They're very interesting, and we also really are people that lament the size and bureaucracy of some elements of the federal government. And there was a lens of how do we apply these theories from Christensen to blowing up bad parts of the federal government. And there was kind of this obvious thing. We both moved a lot. We hated mail forwarding. We hated getting Christmas card lists and putting those together. Just so much of the mail process is just this daily weekly touch point you have that's so unpleasant. And so Will was thinking about it for about a week, and then he was like, I've got this crazy idea. And then we spent the summer kind of doing a bunch of design thinking, ethnography exercises around the challenges of postal mail. And by the end of the summer, it was like, gosh, this thing is so broken, such low-hanging fruit to make it better. It's definitely worth doing. And we thought we could raise money for it, which for us was like, we were both married and had kids. We were like, we need to be able to pay ourselves something. So that was the early days. So that was wrapping up in Boston. I had been to Palo Alto before. Will was like, we got to go to Texas. And so we had some friends in Texas. We came down. Austin seemed like a cool place for it. I memorized the top 10 talking points on the Chamber of Commerce website because I then had to use those a lot in answering investors' questions like, why are you in Austin? I would repeat some of those data points. We'll come back to more of that later. I think most of them are not true, but what's okay. Anyway, so we came to Austin and then raised this round and started. And that was in 7 years ago. 7 years ago.
Incredible. I can't believe it's been that long.
Wow. I met this guy who
Yep.
had much longer hair at that time.
That's true, I did.
Damon, if you don't know him, is like man about town in an amazing way. Always in any coffee shop, Damon is somehow in all of them at the same time, helping people find their way.
My aura persists in all the coffee shops that I've been to.
It's like a hologram almost, kind of in the corner with a few people. It's good. It's important.
Thank you. Yes, so I met Evan right at the time that they moved here, and they were trying to get their company together. So lucky me, I got to see this awesome startup kickoff. So in a nutshell, can you explain what Outbox did?
Yeah. So Outbox was. Outbox was Google Voice for your postal mail. So our promise to you is you sign up for our service, you never go to your mailbox again. So instead of going to your physical mailbox, you would open up your phone or computer or website and see access to all of the contents that had come to you in your physical mailbox, where you have it electronically, OCR, searchable, stored forever. And if any of those pieces you wanted, you could click to receive it. You get it in this beautiful packet. And eventually you could pay your bills through it. You could archive Christmas cards. You could do all sorts of cool things with it. So it was this crazy business. It was very operationally intensive. It was scanners and lasers and hardware and all sorts of nonsense that we had to build. It was a lot more complicated than we thought. We had to build a way eventually to, if someone had a locked mailbox, we needed a copy of their mailbox key, which is this whole other story. So you could take a picture of the mailbox key with your phone, and then we would 3D print a mailbox key on our side from the photo. And anyway, all sorts of crazy stuff that had to go into building that company. We were able to launch it in a partnership with basically a region of the US Postal Service, which we kind of brokered legally, but like as a regional pilot. And then we get sort of summoned to go up to Washington, D.C. to meet the Postmaster General. And it's L'Enfant Plaza. He oversees 600,000 employees, 300,000 vehicles, largest civilian vehicle fleet in the world, 6,000 members of the Postal Police. They have helicopters. I mean, it's a meeting with like the head of a country. And we had this crazy meeting, and a lot of the press had been like, finally people are taking on this horrible, awful system that lost like $6 billion the last quarter, and we weren't trying to get that prep. We weren't trying to have it be so negative, but it was pretty negative against the Postal Service. So anyway, we had this meeting. We basically lay out, here's how the pilot's been going, and we sort of thought we would be like brokering a deal with them. And there's several of the senior leaders of the Postal Service there, and so the head of, two highlights from it, the head of digital was a guy who was at least in his 60s. His most recent job was he ran the union of all letter carrier unions, like the Meta Union based in Europe. And he said, well, the problem is that no one is going to want Outbox because digital is a fad. Digital only works in Europe. And we were like, wow, that is such an interesting perspective you have. So we keep going around the table and we get around to Postmaster General, who actually...
And that's the head of digital.
That was the head of digital, yeah. Which is weird, even out of self-interest. Like, don't say that your own division is a fad. right? Like it doesn't make like legal on GC. Legal is a fad. Don't say that, man. Anyway, so we get to the Postmaster General, and he's like, well, and he's actually a reasonable guy. And honestly, if I were him, I would probably assess it the same way. He says, the problem is that the customers that you are serving are not our customers. So we had sort of seen it as the United States citizen as the customer because they receive mail, but they also send mail. And we want to improve the user experience for them. And he sees his customer as the junk mailer who is paying all the revenue to spam U.S. citizens. And so it's sort of like the cliche is, if the product is free, you are it. And that's kind of where we've gotten with the Postal Service. So the Postal Service has this asset, which is 6-day-a-week access to your interior of your home, to your kitchen table. And they sell that access. So anyway, he didn't formally shut us down then, but he was just like, we can never stand by and support what you're doing. And if you want to try to put something together, but it was kind of clear that this was going to be the end of it. So we walk out to the elevator and very long elevator right down. You get off the elevator and there's the first horse and buggy, not the first horse, but the first buggy of the original letter carriers, and it just kind of returned us full circle. So yeah, it kind of ended pretty abruptly. We then, the segue to Able is we then decided to employ this really crazy method of trying to get your mail without working with the Postal Service, and that required all of this really crazy operational work, and kind of concluded pretty quickly that the only way to make that work, given the unit economics, was sort of like to raise $100 million or something, where you just burn through it until you have density in key markets. And some combination of, we didn't think that was the right thing to do, we didn't think we could do that, it's a crazy idea. So we had $4 million or something in the bank, and went to our investors and were like, this company can't work. There were some small pivots we could have done. You could have become only a commercial product or smaller things, but we just thought those were boring and not worth building. So we said, we'll just give the money back. And Mike was like, give the money back? That's crazy. No, just build something else. We're like, okay, say more. And Mike's story is interesting. Mike made his money in a company called Motive in Austin a long time ago. There was a few companies like Vignette and Motive that most people in this room probably don't know. I wasn't here, but these companies that I still don't really understand what they do, honestly. But it's early aughts, 10, 15 years ago, they IPO'd or sold for hundreds of millions of dollars. Mike was involved in building one of those companies. He made all this money. He almost went to Austin Ventures. He didn't. He wanted to be a venture capitalist. He goes to Silicon Valley. He's got this money, and he's begging to have anyone take his money. No one will take his money. He can't find anyone to take his money. And he finally meets this guy, Evan, not me, and invests in this company called Odeo. And it was a week or two later. Odeo was one of the first podcasting platforms. And a week or two later, iTunes announces podcasting, and it destroys the company immediately. That Evan calls Mike, and it's like, Mike, I don't even think your check has cashed yet. I've just got to give you the money back. We're shutting down. And Mike's like, this is the first investment that he made. He's like, can you please just keep the money? Is there anything that you're working on? Just anything. And Evan fumbles through this thing that he describes, and Mike's like, I have no idea what you're talking about, but just keep the money. And that was Twitter. And so Evan had kind of fumbled through describing this micro messaging thing that Mike had no idea, and that was Twitter. Anyway, Mike takes from that lesson that it's, especially in these very speculative things, it's really not about the product, it's really about the team. So for Mike, he's like, sure, the product you guys had come up with, it didn't find product market fit, but you built this great team, and you move fast, and you do really cool stuff, so of course you're just going to go build something else. And most of the investors felt that way. It was funny, there were two $10,000 investors that did not feel that way. And anyway, it's not even 90-10, it's the 99-1 rule. The smallest investor is the most annoying, at least in our experience. And so that was kind of the fumes of that 3 years in, and the beginnings of the new deal.
So before we talk about Able, what can we learn from the failure, if you want to call it that, of Outbox?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I definitely call it a failure. I mean, it was not like, we were not victims of random government intervention. Let's see, I think our first 100 customers, I would say be very careful with how you get customer feedback. So we were running a very manual pilot for these customers, and we were friends with most of them, and so they will lie to you because they like you and they want to be friends with you, and so they tell you how great your stuff is. So I would just say be really careful about how you collect feedback around stuff. It is very different when it's a stranger. It's also very different once they have to put in a credit card number. There's a real threshold there of like, are they actually going to give you money for what you do? So I'd say be really careful about the feedback that you get, how you manage that feedback and process it is accurate. You know, I'm involved in a venture fund now that invests in companies in heavily regulated industries. This is a very exciting new area, and you know, PayPal strategy. David Sachs was the GC of PayPal at the time, later CEO founder of Yammer, later CEO of Zenefits of PayPal fame. His strategy was they would only file the state money license, I'm missing one word in there, for PayPal as soon as they got the threatening lawsuit letter from the Attorney General of the state. Because especially if you're in financial services, the burden you have around filing and compliance in states is like crazy. It's most startups, you just can't operate because it's so complicated and expensive. So PayPal's strategy was literally, we will not comply until you sue us. And so it's kind of ironic, come full circle. So Zenefits, you know, Parker gets thrown out, you know, in kind of disgrace around not being a lot more on top of how they were dealing with these insurance exchanges. So navigating that space is really difficult. We, I think, we're taking a bit more like poke them in the eye approach. And the government has two things. They have unlimited time and they have unlimited money. And they also tell you what's legal or not. So I think competing with the government or selling to the government requires its own like unique kinds of strategy, and I would probably run our strategy differently today. I think we could have designed it in more partnership with them early, more quickly, knowing that there was no way we could build a massive private technology company doing what we wanted to do and sold them all the technology for, I don't know, $100 million or something. Instead of just trying to fight them and then realizing that what we were doing was being made impossible by our competitor. And they had the final say as like the regulator of the space. So that would be one. What else did we do? I don't know. PR is overrated. Don't believe your own PR. Choose your co-founders wisely, which I think we did. Treat your co-founder like a spouse. If it is your spouse, then you really need counseling. Will and I have just an awesome, deep, great relationship. I do think the analogies between being married and having a co-founder are many. And we've worked with a number of counselors over the years. At one point, our wives, the four of us were at dinner together, and our wives were like, we are not going to do this because if you guys aren't even friends anymore, and we will not let this company get in the way of like our families being friends with each other. You guys need help. And we were like, we'll read a book about that. You know, of course we didn't want to ask for help. But we got a coach, and I've had like a bunch of coaches since, and that was awesome for us. But I see a lot of people in our co-founder relationships, like with a buddy that they've never gone through difficult things with, they've never shared decision-making with, they, in some cases, have never worked directly with. So even at like as simple things as like work style, it's like, oh, well, one of you comes in at 8, the other comes in at 9:30. Well, for those 90 minutes, are you like seething that, where are you? Why aren't you here? And worse, what I would do is like be seething, but then not say it. So it like builds up over time. Anyway, the marriage analogies are endless. I think it is a marriage. It really is. I don't know. That's a friend of mine.
Cool. I guess one more thought on is shutting down. How did you handle kind of going to your investors and saying, maybe the not so great news that things were not going to work out. Was there anything to learn from how that you guys handled that?
Let's see. So, the challenge, so we had done, we were probably 90-10 in terms of 90% of our capital was from like 2 people, but we had done a party round on AngelList, which brought in like 65 investors in small amounts, and those people are unhelpful when you need them and annoying when you don't need them. I don't know, I'm mixed on that. So when that kind of news comes out, some guy that has $1,000 in, who's like a dentist in Milwaukee, is like really curious about like his information rights, and it's like, this is why having those kinds of rounds doesn't make sense. It wasn't a huge problem for us, but there were a few like annoying cases like that. I do think the more investors you have, it can be helpful because it's more potential advocates for you, but it's kind of a high beta proposition because there are more people to celebrate with you, but there are more of them to be a challenge for you to have. The news, we called everyone on the phone. We wanted to be on top of the communications plan and engage with them directly and hear them out. What else? Yeah, I think just having that trust and rapport so that they believe you, they believe what you're saying, they know they can get a straight answer from you is the kind of hopeful trust type activities you can do so that they would be in a position to sort of say like, keep the money. You think you should go, And I mean, it doesn't need me making the argument for why Mike Mabel should be on your board, but he's amazing and he's like the ultimate entrepreneur's entrepreneur. And in secondary markets like Austin, when a lot of us are having to go to family offices or, non-traditional venture investors, those people are not the kind of people most likely that are going to say, keep the money, go build something else, it's awesome. Those are the people that are like immediately reviewing the liquidation preferences and asking you to sell all of your laptops and stuff that like, listen, you put in $1 million, if you're trying to get 20 cents out on the dollar, you chose the wrong asset class here. Like, that's not how anyone makes money in this space. But there are a lot of people like that.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Yeah. I think a lot of entrepreneurs just hide when they have bad news or they don't have that good relationship, and to go and just kind of own up to it. So sounds like you guys did that. We'll talk more about the relationship cultivation that you've done a little bit later.
Cool.
So let's talk about Able a little bit, and then I want to get into some more general topics.
Cool.
Kind of what was the impetus behind it, and I guess how's it going? What are any lessons there that you've learned? What's the stats?
Yeah, so we started Able 3.5 years ago, kind of the height of the CFPB, Consumer Financial Protection Board Bureau, which gained a lot of power under Obama, was in combination with Sarbanes-Oxley this massive constricting force on major banks, which created actually a lot of opportunity for startups to deliver, in some sense, innovative solutions. In some sense, it's exactly what the banks used to deliver. They just weren't able to deliver them anymore. So Able's industry, small business online finance, has ironically taken a huge hit under Trump, who basically eviscerated the CFPB. In the long run, I think this is great for consumers because the CFPB was wrecking shop on a company, for example, Zest is a great story. CIO of Google thought payday lending was horrible for the world, created this massively data-infused approach to giving people payday loans more like in the 50% interest rate, where normally they're like 300%. So to most people, it's like 50%, that sounds outrageous, but it was dramatically better for the consumer. And the CFPB, with no real statutory authority, basically shuts down the company. And so they were, from my opinion, doing really bad things for the people they were trying to protect. So in the grand scheme of things, this is great that the CFPB has been restricted because it means that players are shipping the products that they think find demand in the market, and that drives up competition and down price, which is great. It has been very bad for startups in the space because the prospect of us being a non-bank alternative lender, so there's a big dividing line of are you a bank chartered entity or not, and bank chartered entities have all sorts of regulations. So as a non-bank chartered entity, there's all sorts of stuff that we could do, faster, cheaper, etc., that the big guys couldn't do. So we, full circle, so we sold the company. and we are happy with the sale. There were some documents signed today, which is exciting, so thank you for the free drinks. But so
Nice.
I think in a weird way, like that we would probably still be running maybe a bigger, faster growing, heading to IPO on its own company if Hillary were elected. I don't know, it's kind of interesting. Consumer finance and financial companies become very political, are massively impacted by what's happening in Washington. And most startup founders have never been to Washington, so have no idea how this stuff works. So, what did Able do? Able provided low interest loans to small businesses that banks couldn't serve. So if you're a small business and you need up to $5 million to open a second location, working capital, equipment purchase, or whatever, mostly banks will not finance it. So most business owners get nothing. They go with a personal credit card, they get a HELOC on their home, or they get some super high interest alternative credit product. So it was sort of the opening premise was like, wouldn't it be cool if there were a way that more small businesses could access more capital faster at lower interest rates for longer terms? Yes, that would be very cool. So how do you get there? So the innovation really was in trying to build an alternative credit model and loan structure, which said, okay, if you come to us and you want $500,000, we can underwrite you now using kind of a standard underwriting approach, which is a blended consumer and business model, because a lot of these people run cash on both sides, and it's really blended in like a hair salon, for example. And so we said, okay, if you come to us today, we can underwrite you and say we'll give you $500K at 14% or whatever. But if you're willing to have your friends and family participate as lenders in the loan, then the more then that you get to participate in your loan, the more we can lower your interest rate. And we can do that for two reasons. There's a structural reason where that capital actually stats subordinated to our senior capital. So if you don't repay, then it is your friend or your neighbor that you're not repaying first. So that's a big disincentive around non-payment once you have the loan. But it's even great before that, which is to say social proof matters. Like in the old school world of banking, small businesses and small banks in small towns, you kind of got loans from bankers that knew you and could trust you because you were a person of integrity because we saw you down the street. Now, there are adverse impacts of that. It means that a lot of our lending is racist and it's homophilic because people with the money give money to people that look like them. So there are problems with that. But the modern world of banking, where you basically plug the internet, into your iPhone, and we ask the internet to assess you only on the basis of data, actually limits one of the most basic criteria used in the 5 C's of underwriting, which is character. One of the 5 C's is character, which it used to be small business banker taking the loan committee. Hey, Jim Williams is up for a loan. Anyone have anything to say about Jim? Well, that Christmas party last month, that guy was hammered. Okay, well, let's just tell him we can't do it. I mean, not that that's how we want all loan decisioning to be made, but that's actually a valuable, accretive piece of information, is people that know you assess, are you trustworthy, are you going to repay? So that was a theory. The loan worked in the sense of we were able to offer lower interest rates, and the challenge for us is when you're competing with the on-debt capital, which is a $1 billion company, which does have a bank charter, or even a Bank of America that has a $100 million ad buy, even if our loan is faster, cheaper, quicker, better, everything, you're still selling against the big guys that saturate the market across the same channels of direct mail, phone calls, etc. So we were a case where if markets were totally rational and liquid, a loan product which is the same on everything except a lower interest rate would actually fetch an unlimited demand. But markets are not rational and there's an acquisition cost. And so the challenge for us all along has just been, how do you get scale without having massive pile of cash to acquire customers? So we built a bunch of really cool stuff, and I can basically only say the following, which is we built a lot of different things, algorithms, technology, process, and brands that all was very valuable in the process of who wanted to buy us. But actually trying to be your own bank with 1 million customers is something that you need a giant war chest. So as we see SoFi, the big student lender, lean, Stanford guys, cheap acquisition, Facebook ads, they buy Super Bowl ads now. It all kind of comes back to giant brand spend. Anyway, too much. That's Able.
Gotcha. All right, that's great. Thanks for the rundown of that. So we're getting closer to the 8 o'clock hour. So let's talk to a more general topic around garnering support for your ideas and general network gardening and grooming, and how do you build a network and how do you maintain it? Because I feel, having known you for many years, I've seen how you have these techniques and philosophies behind that.
Yeah.
What should people do when they want to build and maintain a great network?
Yeah. Well, so the reason Evan Loomis, a good friend of mine, wrote this book called GetBacked was really as a solution for our own problem, which was we had taken a few hundred meetings of some 26-year-old Austinite who was trying to raise money for their startup, and they had a crappy deck. And we would say we didn't think we were experts at it. We just offer advice, and we're like, let's stop offering advice and write a book. And actually the first pass was, let's create a blog and just write some stuff down, and then it kind of turned into a book. So it's really hard to summarize the high-level pieces of it, but let me give a few kind of takeaways. So the first half of the book is how do you create a compelling deck? And I think our value add there is we have a lot of interesting decks that raise a lot of money in it, so I hope those will be illustrative to you. Once you have a beautiful deck, though, that is just the beginning. If you have a beautiful deck, you may not be able to raise any money for it, and if I have a really crappy deck, I may be able to raise a lot of money, because the real question is, now that you have this asset which describes your company and the marketing selling an asset to raise capital, the question is what are you going to go do with that deck? And the main thing, if I had to think of one takeaway from this, is most founders I see approach raising capital like sort of finding the pot of gold in the Lucky Charms commercial. They think the story is you're going to be at some event, you're going to meet a rich person who wants to meet with you and give you a pile of cash. And so that leads to this kind of theory of they are thinking that their close rate with investors is going to be a lot higher than it is. So for Abel's B round, we had 57 targets that we asked for meetings. We did 26 meetings. We had 13 follow-up meetings, and we got 3 term sheets, and we closed 1 term sheet. So if we wrote the dang book on the thing and closed 1 out of over 50, let's just say you're twice as good as I am. That means you'll close 1 out of 25. Where I talk to most founders, especially in Austin, it's oh, how's the fundraising going? Oh, it's great. Oh, really? Great. How much money have you raised? Well, there's just one guy, and he seemed really interested. I mean, we didn't get to numbers yet, but he just seems really interested. Okay, that's one. That's good. How many people have you talked to? Well, there was this happy hour last week, and there were 2 people at that, and I think it's probably about 7 now. And it's just this okay, we've got to 10x that number to have a shot at closing it. So while people are super disciplined about running a funnel process and raising and recruiting customers, each stage of your funnel, people are meticulous. They know what the follow-up rates are at each stage of the funnel. On the investor side, they're totally lackadaisical. They think the investor's just going to randomly call them and offer them money, and it doesn't work like that at all. So I would treat it like any intentional sales campaign that you're running. So it begins with who's at the top of the funnel. Let's try to get to 50 on that list. Are those people that can write a check, that have written a similar check recently, that ideally you have some kind of tie to, and that has expertise in your industry? Okay, how are we going to get in front of those people? Let's build a plan. Let's reach out to each of them. Let's have great boilerplate copy. Let's have a great deck. How is our pitch going to go? Let's practice the pitch. Let's have the pitch meetings. Let's keep track of all of it as CRM. Which ones wanted to meet? Which didn't want to meet the second time? Now it's time for the follow-up. And basically just stay on top of it and run it as a really focused campaign over a period of 2 months versus, man, the number of people I meet that are 18 months into a sloppy 500K seed round, that is the recipe for not raising any money. So I guess the high-level piece is treat it like you're acquiring customers. They just happen to be investors.
So specifically, you leverage your network as well, right?
Yep.
In doing this, you have this amazing description of the process, and that's very instructive. But obviously, you're going to be more successful if you had built a network previously by doing something.
Yeah.
How do you cultivate that? Because I've seen some things that you do that actually make people want to stay connected to you. How do you do that?
Yeah, that's a great point. So the question that you just asked, which you asked a second time, because the first time you asked it, I actually didn't answer it. Because the question really is, okay, so if you have 50 people at the top of the funnel, that process is going to go a lot better. You're going to have a much higher close rate if you have some exposure to those people ahead of time. Especially if the basic premise is one of the key drivers for those investors making early stage investment decisions is, can they trust you? If they've just met you, it's going to be really hard to get to a yes if they've just met you. So there's a few things. So let's see, 2 ideas. One is called meet before you meet. So one thing we did with Able early was I emailed investors, a bunch that I did not know, and I said, I really admire your work on this board. This company has navigated some really awesome challenges that I think may be instructive to what we're doing. I'm not raising money. Is there any chance I could have a half an hour of your feedback on what we're working on right now? So those are cold emails. I closed about half of those, meaning like half of them said, oh yeah, I'd take 30 minutes. You're not asking for money. That's fine. So in the meeting, they actually, number one, I got great feedback. Like they gave really instructive, interesting points. I could follow up with a handwritten thank you note and a book or some thoughtful small gift. And then I could show them 6 months later that I actually remembered what they said, I did it, and I had something to show for what I did. And so I think part of what's happening in that exchange is they're trying to figure out, can they trust you, and are you someone that is going to listen to the feedback that they give? So that was a little hack for kind of meet before you meet. This is another one, which is like, you got to have a thing that's not your work. My father-in-law says, like, you have to live with yourself for your entire life, so you might as well be interesting. And so I think something like finding some topic or cause or organization that's like not your primary work is a really great way to meet a lot of other people. It also is something nice that you can talk about when you're like at a cocktail party and you're not always having to talk about work. So, that's why a lot of people end up, you advise companies or you join boards or you just are curious and you go out to events. It's really great to have practice raising money, like on the board of a nonprofit, for example. The nonprofit talks about, like, who do we know in our network that's rich, that's given money before? How do we get into them and make an ask that honors them, and how do we recognize them at the gala? Like, it's different than a for-profit that has a lot of similarities to it. So I'm doing a lot of things in parallel in my life, and those like little dress rehearsals build a rapport with all those different people and kind of give you a lot of easy early chances to fail.
Awesome. So let's say you're about to have a meeting with a very high net worth individual.
Yeah.
What's on your mind? Like, how are you going to connect with this person that could easily fund your business and then some? And you're about to go into that meeting. Like, what's on your mind? How do you prepare for that?
So I love to do research on people. There are cool tools out there. Some are paid, some are not paid. So it's just, you want to kind of respect their time and like be prepared and understanding like where they're coming from. Really great to build a personal rapport with them. Let's see, I was with this like eccentric billionaire in Dallas last week for this meeting for this new venture, and when you're in someone's office, there's usually like ephemera to talk about. So he had like this taxidermied snake on the wall, and it was like, you got to tell me about that snake. And it's just like immediately disarming, and it turned into this whole story about these people out at the ranch and this crazy gun thing and all that. The story didn't matter, but just like, hey, like you're a human person, and like we talk about human things. So I think finding ways to connect with people personally is really helpful. I found a lot of people want to keep pretty professional in those meetings, especially more like an engineer, type A, male founder. It's just like, I am here to assault you with data about my company. And you might imagine how well that works. Not super well. So I will find like, I don't know, I end up in conversations about, and trying to just be like a normal person, but like, I don't know, what people's hobbies are, their marriage, their kids, like how the partnership is going, and you just kind of create those little openings to moments where they're going to like share something that's actually like on their mind. I've had a number of things, like our oldest son had sensory processing disorder, which is somewhere on the autism spectrum, and led us to like learn a lot about raising difficult kids. And that's just this sort of like human thing where if someone does have kids, often if it's a guy, they'll be like, oh, he's terrible, they complain about the kids. The women are probably like, oh, I love my children. I don't know if that's true. That's through my experience. So it's like, oh man, it sounds like that kid, it must be really hard to raise that kid, and we have a little conversation about that. And then there's a book that like totally changed our world and how we raise kids. It's called How to Talk So Kids Will Listen. If you haven't read it, you should. It's like a great life book. And I'll just mail in that book with like a little note, like, hey, I'm sure you're slammed, but chapter 1 is awesome. I think this could be really helpful for you guys, let me know. And I don't know, it kind of situates you a little bit more as like a peer with them a little bit. So I like the personal connection piece. And then I like really taking a hold of the meeting. So you close the connection piece, and then it's like, wait, as I mentioned in the email, we've got this series that we're putting together. We are still looking for a lead, and if we could dive into it, I'd love to spend this time together to see if this could be a fit for what you guys are investing in. Just being really clear, like when you're a founder and you're selling equity in your company, you are actually doing them a favor by offering this asset to them. You're not begging for money. You're not there to grovel. You're not trying to trick them. It's just really straightforward. I've been busting my butt building this thing, and you've done a great job of raising a bunch of money to invest in companies. Let me just use this time to help you figure out if this is a fit for you. And then you can kind of walk away in some sort of sense of like, it's like less personal if they say no. It's a little bit more like, I marketed this asset and like, it wasn't a fit for what they were buying. I've definitely seen emails, friends have sent me an email and they said, I just sent this to so-and-so as like the 2,000 word case to the investor who said no, like why they're wrong. Like, it's a really bad idea to do that.
One phrase you used when you were talking to me about this previously is strategic travel. When you're hitting some of the other cities, say we're all entrepreneurs here in Austin. Sometimes we may need to hit some of these other key cities like San Francisco or New York. What is strategic travel, and can you talk about that?
This is so fun. Well, I feel like an idiot here. I don't really know much about it, but we try to do it and we have a lot of fun doing it. So I think we are on a little bit of a desert island in Austin. Silicon Valley created 53 times more equity value in 2016 than Austin did. So Silicon Valley can basically take a nap on January 7th and be tied with Austin in terms of value created. That's really bad news, like on a bunch of fronts. There's lots more data on investors and it's a complex problem and it's not an easy solution. Anyway, so my point is, whether you're talking about hiring great people or raising great capital, like we living in Austin have got to be really plugged into the coasts, especially like New York, SF, LA, might add like Chicago and Boston to that. So so strategic travel. So I will try to land, so I'll try to be in those cities every quarter, and I'll try to land like a core meeting or two with like the big person I'm trying to see. And I'll try to not always have a direct purpose. Like even with the main person I'm asking for a meeting, it's like, I happen to be in LA. I'd love to come by for half an hour because this person said we should meet because I think we're working on some similar projects. You land that meeting, you then email the next person. Hey, I'm in town to meet so-and-so. Might you have a half an hour on this day or the next day? And I have a few buddies that we all kind of do this together, and I'll say like, one of them is Evan Loomis. I'm like, Loomis, I'm in New York next Tuesday, like give me 2 or 3 of your favorites. And we're kind of weird about this because it's not even like we really have a specific purpose for meeting with them. And sometimes they're like, why are we meeting? But usually it's just really fun because they're like cool people doing interesting things. So I'll build out those city lists and just kind of win in a city. In San Francisco, I can do like a 13 meeting day because there's that United terrible flight that lands at SFO at like 7:20 a.m. It's awful. You can be in Soma by like 8:15 psych class. It's really unhealthy. But you can just cram it all day. And then you can even do, like, when you really get there, you can do, like, drinks with a few friends where, like, 4 or 5 of you each invite 5 people. Anyway, I just think if who you hang out with, there's a bunch of truisms here. You're the average of the 5 people you spend time with. Social capital is the leading conduit to intellectual, financial, and political capital. There's all sorts of things about the value of a network. And given that I think we live in, like, a social capital weak ecosystem, we should really be thoughtful about that. And so many people, while they are monitoring their TD Ameritrade account hourly, they may think once a year about their social capital. They don't even know what that term means. Like, do you meet people? Yeah. How? Well, I went to this meetup. Well, how'd you pick it? It was that night. When you went there, like, what did you do? I got a drink. Who did you talk to? What do you mean? The person next to me. Well, why? Why? I mean, they were next to me. Anyway, you would never buy a stock that way, right? Like, it's just crazy. Most people are totally derelict, not thoughtful about building relationships. And so even just doing some basic things can go a long way. And I think, sadly, in Austin, we have to do that to survive.
One other thing you mentioned was anchor meetings and kind of getting an anchor meeting and then playing that meeting
Yeah.
off on other people.
Oh, yeah.
Can you really quickly kind of talk about how you did that?
Oh, well, you land the first one, and especially if you're meeting with investors, they're mostly lemmings. They have total FOMO. They want to know who else is going to be in the deal. Everyone asks that question. And so, anyway, you got to get the anchor meeting, but then it's like you email everyone else, and it's like, as soon as you land a top 10 venture investor in San Francisco, then every new email is like, hey, I'm in town next Thursday. I've got a Greylock meeting at noon. You have any time in the morning? You bet they have time in the morning. Anyway, so they just chase each other around, especially in that world.
And on strategic travel, I think you told me that you actually wanted to meet someone and you weren't going to be in town, but you told them that you were. Maybe I'm making this up, but you're like, yeah, I'm going to be in such and such location, and then you decide to go. Did I make that up?
Are we on air? No, I will. So you should not lie. It will always catch up with you. There's a big DC meeting I was trying to get recently with someone that lives in DC but is almost never there. And so with the scheduler, I was like, here are 3 dates that I'm likely to be in DC. Any of those dates, I will be there. They named one of them, and I was there.
It makes sense to me. You tell them, hey, I'll be there, because the meeting is so important.
Yeah, but the point there is you've got to generate urgency.
Okay.
And it's that you're going to be in town is the urgency.
Uh-huh.
So I find it, many of my CEO friends in Silicon Valley say, Evan, it's easier for you to get meetings being from Austin than for me. Because when they email Founders Fund, it's like, well, we're busy, we don't have time to meet. But it's like, oh, he's just in town for this moment of time. It's like urgent. It's actually interesting to meet with this person. So in that sense, I think being in Austin is like, if you lived in Cleveland or something, they'd be like, oh, this isn't serious. But like you're in Austin, so they think it's cool. But you're in town only in a select time, so they're like, we want to meet.
Yeah.
Questions?
Yeah, we should do questions soon. Let's touch on Austin since you brought it up.
Yeah.
What are some, you mentioned that we need to go raise money elsewhere. The sheer size of Silicon Valley versus Austin. Are there other things that you've noticed that are, you're like, why are you here? As one example, one question I want to ask you. You chose Austin. You answered that question a bunch with Outbox.
Yeah.
And also places where we can improve. If you have things on top of mind, let's go through them, and then we can go to Q&A.
Yeah, so one thing I am concerned about that a lot of people are cheering on is like Oracle putting 750 people on the lake, Dropbox coming here, Google putting several thousand more here. Everyone's cheerleading these developments. If we keep cheerleading these kinds of developments, I think we become Phoenix, which is like a town of 5 million people known for nothing. And so we're in a situation where we have lots of 75K jobs getting put in Austin that have ping pong tables and hire liberal arts grads to answer phones and process operations tickets. That's better than not having those jobs at all. But it's kind of a mixed bag in terms of what it does to the startup ecosystem in town. It massively drives up rent downtown, so it's like really hard to get office space. It for whatever engineering talent or even like DevOps or whatever other talents here, certainly on the creative side, they're going to pay double what startups can afford to pay. Do we like the little penance they pay of sponsoring meetups and stuff? I don't know. I lost a bid for Outbox space in Colorado Tower because Atlassian got 5 stories on a 10-year lockup. Thank you, Atlassian, for the wonderful support tonight. We enjoyed the food. But is that good or bad that they're here? I mean, certainly it's good for Austin, but I just think it's kind of a mixed story. Like we feel like we're becoming really techy, but you've got to really double click on that. And a big thing is, the big question I like to ask, sure, if you're selling small business apps for Dropbox in Austin, you could, if you're really good, you could make $500,000 a year. You can actually make a lot of money. Most of those companies, when they hire people in Austin, those people have basically zero equity. So why is it that the equity holders that we're talking about in Austin as venture investors are Dellionaires? Dell's like 40 years old. That was a really long time ago. So it would just be a massive game changer for Austin to have a $1 billion plus IPO with people that live here that actually own equity in that company, because then you'd have real money and a talent base. Trilogy was a really cool thing that brought a lot of people here, and I'm glad that happened 19 years ago. That's a long time. I was in high school. It's a long time ago. we need another win.
Agreed. All right, well, thank you very much
Yeah.
for answering the questions, and we'll flip it to the audience, but let's give Evan a big hand for the interview. All right, so I'm going to pass this out to whomever would like to ask a question. All right, here you go. And if you guys could just kind of pass this around.
Jerry, so you mentioned that it can be like a relationship when you're in a business with a partner. Now, there's also a relationship between you and investors. And like any relationship, you're standing around the bar and you see who looks attractive, and then you find out if they know how to have a conversation. So how important is the pitch deck as far as how professional it looks good? You know, how the copy's written, how the photographs, the video, whatever. How important is that first step of attraction? You know, even if you have the best thing, does that how much does that play, the attraction part with investors?
Yeah, so I think creating a beautiful, compelling pitch deck is like a few $1,000s on design and like 30 hours of time. Like, I'm not saying you put in 1,000 hours of time. So there's some diminishing marginal return there. Largely, I think in this day, it's like, it's just irresponsible to not have a deck that looks good, because it's not that hard to do, I think. It's hard to have it be amazing, but it's not hard to have it be pretty good. Probably depends on the company type. It's like super IP, and you have a bunch of scientists, and it's really about like the patents and the data, probably matters less. But especially if you're a consumer brand, I think there's some element of like, wait, you're telling me you're creating this beautiful, elegant experience for consumers, and like you use logos that aren't pings with transparent backgrounds, and it's like white clipping. It's like, you must be joking. So I think if it's a consumer company, I think it's got to look great. I don't think it's hard to make it look really compelling. And yeah, so I think there's the first 100 hours probably makes sense. It's also important to think about what you use the deck for. So a lot of people are thinking about, well, I'm using a deck for pitching investors. You do use it for that, but I use the deck for all kinds of things. I use the deck to recruit senior employees. You know, they want to see the deck and what's the vision of the company. Well, how else would you tell them the vision of the company? You can meet with them and fumble through your words for an hour, but they can see your website, but that's really the product, that's not the company. So it's great for investors. If you have anchor giant clients, if you're like a B2B company and you're pitching some big company to be one of your early customers, you want to share the vision of, well, who's on the team? Is that your website that's doing that? No, you want to send them something that like looks really good, I think. So I use the deck for a lot of different marketing and communication purposes. Also, I think that if you've not written it down in the deck, it actually doesn't exist. That there's something generative about creating a deck that forces you to identify all the parts that make a business. So a lot of people are like, oh, well, it's just really not ready yet. Like, I don't even have a team because it's just me, so I don't even have a team slide. Well, you need a team slide, and you're going to put in like 4 avatars, and you're going to put in titles of the 4 people that are going to be your first few hires. Because when you're pitching an investor, they want to know where the money's going to go, and you need to know who's going to be on your team. Well, I don't have them yet. Well, start interviewing people. Well, I won't have hired them when I pitch them. Doesn't matter. Put their names in the deck. Anyway, so there's some element of like, when you buy the gear, the skills will follow. And I think that really happens in creating a deck. And the general reason I hear argument against the deck is like, we haven't figured out all the parts yet. And I would say like, that's exactly why you should build a deck.
Have you ever seen really bad ones?
Oh yeah, like daily, hourly, all the time. They're terrible. Most of them are really
But what if they have the most bestest idea in the world?
Yeah, great companies, charismatic founders make, in a pitch meeting, rarely, in my experience, is the investor actually say, let's go through your deck. So most pitch meetings are actually, you're just having a conversation with them. I like to send the deck ahead of time, so they've actually like flipped through it. So in that sense, the conversion of the deck is actually to get the meeting. And then there are other use cases for decks too. You may be in the context of presenting in front of an audience, and in that case, the deck is really a visual prompt for the storytelling that you're doing. So anyway, I'm very pro deck, but just 100 hours, no more. You want me to just call on people, maybe in the back?
Hey, my name is Zach Kassler. I was given your book as a gift a long time ago, and I think we conversed over the internet
Yeah.
once or twice,
Cool, man.
so
Well, I hope it's worked as a monitor
I
stand.
raised
You get a few of
$200K
them.
off it after reading your book. So
Good. Well, it's funny. We are only 10% commission, so thanks for that.
So
That's
I'll
good.
have to check it to you soon.
Yeah. Cool.
I'm wondering, there's been a gap between what was originally like seed money or pre-seed money and now where that stands as far as the amount of traction, et cetera, needed to get to a deck or to, proper raise, if you will. How have you seen anything that would, any good ways to bridge this gap, if you will? If you're at your product comes out in a month and you're raising another round, you don't have traction on it yet, but you have, the team in place, product in place, marketing going, like, what is to replace that traction slide, essentially, or a good way to, you can show pre-testimonials, but I'm trying to think of it.
Right. So in raising a round, you need to generate momentum. The round needs to have some context to it, and the best rounds, the story is something just happened and something is about to happen. So a great narrative is we just closed this 2-month pilot, and let me tell you the things that we found. 79% of people were willing to pay X, and these things happened, and what's about to happen is our full city rollout. And so it kind of creates like this bookend on, let me analyze for you what we contained was a very focused hypothesis test in this experiment, and now let me tell you what we're about to go do, and that's why I'm raising money right now.
How do you get the investor not to wait on that and wait to see the results of the full city rollout, essentially, or wait for that first driver?
Yeah, I mean, you got to generate urgency. So like the slow rollout of like if they're like, well, let me know how it's going, like that's a no in my book. So there are a 2x2 matrix. You can learn something now or in the future, and the answer can be yes or the answer can be no. Okay, so there is very rarely a long yes. It's almost never the case that like you send them enough reminders about your round that they finally come into the round. So I actually think a quick no is very important. It's very good. So in this case where they're like, well, we'd love to see it in a few months, I think what you have to do is consider that person a no. And in the conversation with them, so we were in a case, I think the best entrepreneurs will close their financing round the day their bank goes to zero. I mean, technically that's when you would do it to be the least dilutive, right? It's also insane because you may miss payroll. But we had that situation where we were really about to run out of money. And so we really needed to close in like 90 days from the beginning of the raise, which is very aggressive. Like most, I think, are 6 months. So double that. So we put the targets together. I said we had a SF, New York, and LA week each. And I said, I'm in town these 3 days. We're raising this round. We have a target close of 60 days from now. And if you guys think this could be a fit for your investment thesis right now, let's meet. In the meeting, all right, well, we'll get back to you. Okay, well, just a reminder, I'm going to be back out here in 2 weeks. Would love any second round meetings if it's appropriate, but we have a target close in 60 days. And so that was just some efforts to like generate urgency for that round. Now, it's risky because you may not get to do that. But, so I think by that strategy, I was trying to smoke out false maybes, because investors' goal is to not give you money but have you still like them.
Optionality.
Yeah, totally. And so when I said we're closing in 60 days, they were like, oh man, next week is the partners golf tournament, and I really wish we could look at this. It's like, okay, hey, I understand. That's okay. There's a story that Sequoia wrote a $100 million check within 24 hours of meeting an entrepreneur. Like if they want to be in a deal, they will get into the deal. So I think finding ways to create that urgency will smoke out those quick no's, and that will, for you as a salesperson, let you focus on qualified leads. You have taken them out of your funnel because they're a no. But that overall effort, that is a marketing effort. I mean, the real story for most people desperately trying to get customers and revenue is this like 3-year death march, right? And so the marketing challenge is packaging the first quarter of the Bhutan March in a way that like generates urgency for the investors, right? Because your product is just always iterating and constantly changing. But it takes a marketing mindset and to be able to sell what is like just happened.
So what we're looking to do is gather 20 investors in a room and pitch to them all at once. And we're doing this in Houston. We're setting it up for the 1st of December. Is that something you'd advise as far as a way to build that sort of hype on it? So rather than take one-off meetings, we're looking to bring them all together.
Just for your one company?
Yep.
Could be, it would work very well if you planted someone that you knew was going to lead 50% of the round. I've never seen that done. It's worth trying. Usually demo day things like that are better to like just break the ice and give you a chance to like exchange cards and then I'll come see you next time. But sort of a live auction, I don't know. Try it. Worth a try. A big piece of that is social proof. Who else is going to be in the room? So most likely the A players in the room will feel like they're with a bunch of losers. Because like they're always thinking about who the bigger people are. But try it. Okay, who else we got? I know we're probably almost out of time. This is fun though. Thank you. What else we got?
You touched on this a little, sorry. We met a while back. I'm curious, I see a lot of people that are raising money in Austin, and myself included. When I look back, I wish I'd raised a lot more money than I did. But I see smaller rounds, and I see people only raising locally. And so you talk about going to other coasts and things like that. And I thought it was curious that you came to Austin when you'd already worked at Facebook. Like, you didn't really talk about why you made that decision.
Yeah, so the basics at that time were my co-founder, he was from Texas, and so our choices were Austin or San Francisco for the company, and he had deep ties here, and we were open to it, and he didn't want to move to California. So I was glad I did that. I mean, we love getting to live in Austin. Paul Graham has this wonderful essay on cities, and it has two interesting points in it. His essays are great. If you have they're worth just consuming all of them. They're great. One of them is about how he really valued living in different cities for a while. You don't have to become an expert for like 2 years. Like most of my mind share and financial and other capital that help my businesses comes from having lived and worked in San Francisco and New York. And so just like I might be building a company in an office next to a guy who moved from El Paso because Austin has a bunch of tech stuff, we're kind of similar. We're actually totally unrelated because I have access to capital markets that he doesn't. So I kind of see two Austins. Like there's a world of people that have moved from the coast to Austin that maintain those ties and can access capital quickly. And that's a lot of our creative class here that's still serving clients on the coasts. And then there's sort of people who moved not from the coast to Austin, maybe from elsewhere in Texas, and moved here because they felt like Austin was a cool tech city. And then they're like, man, we went to CTAN and like it was a bunch of dentists. I'm like, we're just kidding. CTAN is great. I'm glad we have it. But you meet a lot of these local investors and people are kind of disappointed with the volume of them and their expertise and how many deals they've been in. So I like Paul Graham's essays a lot. You know, I am very happy that I lived in other places before coming here. At times I thought about moving to other places. Like we do really love getting to live here. The second piece of Paul's essay is about the ambition of cities, and he says there's like a very distinctive characteristic to each of these major cities. Like in San Francisco, no one cares how much money you have, they just care what impact you have in the world. In New York, they only care about how much money you have. In Boston, it's how like educated you are. In DC, it's how much power. It's LA, it's how much fame. And I like to question, like, what is the ambition of Austin? What's the word or two that would describe the ambition of Austin? And I've asked a lot of people that, and most people don't really have an immediate answer. But kind of the mode response is leisure, which in my mind is like refuting the question. And so, like, if we're a city that is passionate about 5 p.m. margaritas,
you know Bejoy, and he's got this ATS equation. Okay.
You know, there are pros and cons to that. The good thing about that is that like most of my friends that still live in San Francisco or New York are like super strung out and they work all the time and they may have a lot of money, but they never get to be in their nice apartment. And like I probably have a better marriage, a better relationship with my kids, and I get more sunlight, and like there are a lot of ways in my life is like a lot better. And you know, many more of my friends in those cities, relative to my friends in Austin, are building companies that are successful and scale. And so I think as a, you know, as someone who's building companies here, we have to think about like, how do you create a culture of excellence in Austin when so much of the norms are really focused on not work-life balance, but just life, you know? And to be really fair, those people are great employees for Dropbox. Bring your dog to work, free dog treats, yoga, ping pong, leave at 5 o'clock, and run on the trail. And like, that is an amazing life. Like, hats off to capitalism. It is amazing that people can have this kind of life. That is an amazing thing. And those may not be the ingredients it takes to build totally crazy, awesome companies, you know? I mean, you spend an hour in Palo Alto, largest owner in Palo Alto now is Palantir. And it's like, they're still, I think, the #1 recruiter out of Stanford. And they have thousands of employees. It's a, I don't know, $15, $20 billion company. And I just kind of think like, it would probably be impossible to build that company in Austin. And so, instead of whining about it, which I try not to do, I kind of like asking the question, like, what are our assets that would let us generate a positive notion of, like, what is the ambition of Austin? What are those possible candidates? Josh Dilworth has some ideas here. So the $1 billion medical center is, like, interesting, and so that could be an interesting platform. The med school itself is doing stuff with UT Athletics, with Formula One, with Lance Armstrong. Maybe there's an argument that we're, like, good enough at tech and close enough to oil and gas that, like, that would be something that could happen here. We have the university. Has a lot of resources. We have, I think, Samsung's only 2 fabs in North America are in Austin, so actually you can make a bunch of semiconductors here. So it's kind of like less like, okay, let's just say, why can't we build Dropbox here, and more like, what assets do we really have here, and let's kind of build around them. Do you have an answer to what the ambition of Austin is?
No. I mean, what Bejoy was saying was to be your authentic self. And he did a talk at South by Southwest a while back that he kind of zeroed in on Willie Nelson as like the originator of the Austin vibe, that when he brought the hippies and the rednecks together, that was the start of Austin's culture. So I thought that was an interesting.
Yeah, and we do, so one little note on that, and so I was texting and stuff with Mike Maples during the whole Uber debacle. And Mike, kind of as a joke, tweeted that thing is like, I won't invest in Austin companies anymore if they kick Uber out. And the vote's coming down, and there were 2 reactions that I found very interesting. One of them I predicted. So Ann Kitchens, who's on the city council, is on the record saying that she loves how bad the traffic is because it means fewer people will move here. And so it's this weird liberal, paternalistic small government, which is like, they want to keep it this liberal bohemia, and they do that by not investing in infrastructure. It's like strange. I don't agree with it, but I could kind of understand it. When we first moved to Austin, every quarter there's a group of people that still protest MOPAC. They meet on Sundays once a quarter, and it's the Say No to MOPAC group. It's been meeting for like 30 years, I think. The other group, so that group I could kind of anticipate. The other group, though, that was strange to me was, and I've ended up in some of these threads, I quoted anonymously a CEO friend of mine on one of the like 8,000 member Facebook Austin tech groups, and I said, a friend of mine said, which is true, it's not just me saying that, actually a friend did say, he said that Austin is a sensory deprivation chamber. So he like goes to the coast, he gets like all fired up with all these ideas, and then he comes back here and it's like, boo. And for him it works because you can be really focused because there aren't like distractions. And so I threw that out and like, you know, what do you think? And the same reaction there happened to the Uber stuff, which is from, and maybe some of you guys, I don't presume, I love to have debates about it. I'm not hostile to that. I like the debates about it. But it's like 35-year-old, jeans wearing male who works at Dropbox is like, you keep you and your effing Silicon Valley money and dirty corporate greed out of our Austin. Like, we're going to do it our way. And it's such a weird, the irony is just immense in my mind. It's like, I don't know if you guys have ever taken Austin cabs, like an actual cab in Austin. It is so scary. It's just such a horrible experience. And like the whole point of Uber was to like break down the corporate control around the medallions. So it's this like passionate laziness of these people to be like, keep SF out of here. It makes no sense to me at all. So what I do like is, I like the Made in Austin brand that a lot of companies have. I think Maples and then like Floyd Kwame, who built the fund in Ohio. I think it is kind of interesting that most consumer internet companies are being built in San Francisco by people that have like never met anyone that lives in the middle of the country. So there's some way to think about what does Austin have that's unique. We have a great design sense. Many of us we eat well, but not from $1,000 juicers. We exercise because it's fun and builds community. Many are probably more likely to be involved in some religious organization. We're like normal enough, but appreciate design. I think that could be a really cool ecosystem for building great companies. Maybe you see that in some of the success of the CPG companies here, having Whole Foods here, and the Skinny Pop Popcorn, I think our biggest IPO last year, one of them. So I think those are some of the things I would grasp onto for like, what do we have that are like good, positive assets that we can build?
Would you agree that companies in Austin are raising smaller rounds? Like it seems like I think you asked about the ambition in Austin. And when I look at it, I think companies aren't shooting to be the Ubers in a lot of cases.
Right.
And some of that is from the investors, they're looking for a little more practicality. Like to just say, we're going to have 1 million users and we'll figure it out later, doesn't really fly here.
Yeah, so the math, the numbers just report people are raising smaller rounds, whether that's because that's all they could raise or they actively said no to more money. I don't hear a lot of cases in Austin of like, they were begging for $5 million and we said only we'll take 2. It could happen. I think there's some of that. We also want to be careful that raising money is not the only metric at the end of the day. Money is a proxy for sale of equity. The realization I had before learning about how the whole equity raising world works is that for the most part, you're always selling about 25% of your company. So raising $5 million not only means you have $5 million, it also means that your company is worth like $20 million. And so that's kind of the flip side of like the reason to raise a lot of money is that it also means that your company is worth a lot more.
Yeah, I would say that was like one of the most counterintuitive things that I learned is that a lot of people that I hear raising less money do so because they assume they'd have to sell more equity in their company to get more money. And that's actually the opposite so much true.
Yeah, I think that's right. So you just go to the market and we basically say we're raising $5 million. Investors, institutional professional investors have an ownership target of 17 to 25% of your company. And so you basically multiply whatever you're raising by 4 or 5. Multiply it by 5 and then you'll settle somewhere between 4 and 5. So you play out that argument and like the basic takeaway is you should always raise more money because it's just going to impute your valuation. So yeah, I'm definitely supportive of raising more money. The more money you raise, the bigger team you can build more quickly and the more runway you can have to really try to do. Because if you're raising money, if it's going to take 6 months to raise money, if you only raise 18 months of money, you really only have 12 months. It's really hard to like put numbers on the wall, 12 months. And we're probably got to be out of time almost. Any final hot topics? One more? Let's just say both of the questions and I'll do them real quick.
Yeah, my name is Ishvan and this is my first time here. And quickly, I do not want to take time, so I just wanted to ask you that already at the beginning, when you have the design and the deck and maybe a team together, already at that time you start looking for funding, or you always wanted to go until a better version or something that is more tangible to show. So is it a good tactic to to rather focus on, as you said, 100 hours and a couple of $1,000 and get a good design, a good wireframe, a good team together to show, to get money, or I really have to get the developer and force them to make a beta that is even more flashy.
Well, the nice thing about a deck is it's pretty modular. I mean, so we'll be on the airplane to go out and pitch, and we're like putting new data in it. You know, so I think I would encourage you to like create the shell of the deck early, because what the shell of a deck will do is it'll teach you what parts of the narrative you're missing. So like a lot of people don't think about advisors, and some companies don't need advisors, but like many good companies have a slide of advisors. So it's like, oh crap, we need some of those, and you can't make those up on the plane on the way there. So just like show you the things you should be thinking about, but I'm always updating the stuff last minute. So I would just say build your list of investors really early, like build it now. You can do it in a few hours and just like start adding people to that list. I'd go ahead and build the shell of the deck, and then you're kind of running them in tandem. Last one real quick. Yeah, you can just yell it out. Oh, here, this guy right here. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you had any advice as to how you manage your like beginning startups, having a relationship, working, going to school, working other jobs. Just kind of like generally how just like dedicating time and your own money and just like building a team or whatever you just do really things like that. Is there any advice?
Can you repeat the question?
I guess just like
No, I mean, have Evan repeat it in the microphone.
So the question is, how do you live a good life? Well, thank you for asking. No, it's hard. Man, let's see. So, being married is on the one hand, it's nice. Friends of mine that are single, that are trying to run companies, like manage like intentional investment in relationships, that's very hard because the nature of a lot of startups is pretty all-encompassing, and it's very hard, I think, to be an intentional dating person when you're running a company. Being married and running a company is very hard because there's someone who has all these reasonable needs from you that it's very hard for you to deliver on. So there's not, I guess you could just be celibate in a monastery is really the only. Monastery startups, it's a new thing. No. So let's see. I think if you are married, you know, having a partner who is fully in it with you, and like I don't know, we found some. My wife's works at a law firm, and so she has to work a lot and travel. And I think a big thing for us, and it sounds small, like being very intentional around communication and like being very thoughtful about how we like hack our schedules. There's a book actually written for women, but it's generally applicable, and it's called I Know How She Does It. And it's written by Laura Vanderkam. You didn't write that down. You should. I Know How She Does It. Laura Vanderkam. I Know How She Does It. And it's this, they do time studies of 1,000 like high performance women, and they back out all these really cool ways that they like were really crafty with how they spend their time. So like we implemented a few of those in our family. So we used to do work late Wednesdays. So we would be with our kids a little bit more in the morning, have like a leisurely breakfast, be able to get them to school, hang out for a little bit, and then Wednesdays we just weren't going to be home for dinner, and we'd work until midnight. So for us, it was like my wife, which is a more billable hours culture, could like bill 6 extra hours by saying this one night it's just going to be this all blown out work night. So that was helpful. I kind of think it's really fun to share a startup like with a family and with kids, like to have the kids come and like learn about it and see when things don't work. Like that's been a really cool experience. But if you're not married or don't have kids, this comes back to the human capital point that we were chatting about earlier. You know, so many of the opportunities I've had in my life came from someone that called me and said like, hey, I've got this thing. And so how do you reverse engineer that pattern? So number one, you need to have a personal brand of like, what's your name by the way? Alex. Okay. So Alex needs to have a brand. And the brand is really just like, what are you about? What is Alex about? Let's say Alex is about reclaimed barn wood furniture making, okay? So you need to have a brand and you've known about something, and then you need to distribute that brand, maybe not with your own website, but just like people need to know what you're about in conversation. Oh, what are you into? Oh, this kind of thing, whatever. Then when someone has some cool thing that like requires this thing that you're good at, they're like, I gotta call Alex. And so that is an approach which I've tried to build, which I think just results in like a much higher deal flow of like cool stuff coming across my plate. And then you're not having to like go out and create everything, you're choosing from the stuff that's coming to you. So I'd say like, what is your brand? How do you distribute that brand? And then who are you kind of sharing that brand with? And so that I think involves grabbing the reins of your own social life, which is like a lot of us have friends, and it's good to have friends and community. Are you spending 10 or 20% of your time being thoughtful about meeting new people? Let me end with this. Peter Thiel's like, really thought going to business school was a bad idea. And I was like, I don't care, I'm going anyway. And he said, okay, well at least, like what you cannot do is if you want to start a company, the worst place to try to start a company is to go to the, I would like to start a company mixer of MBAs. Because it's like a bunch of people that have no ideas. They just want to start a company, but none of them have an idea. He's like, the people that you should be becoming friends with and like building relationships with are like the foreign grad student on a postdoc in the chemistry department, like in the corner microscope. Because when they look up from that microscope and they're like, I wonder if this could be a business, they probably don't know a single business person. And they're going to be like, who could I actually talk to that knows anything about this? You want to be that person. And so the general challenge a lot of us have is network homophily. So we spend time with people that look like us, speak our language, are our age, and live near us and share similar interests. The problem is that those people don't really help you do anything that you want to do with your life. So you don't need to, flee all those people, but you should be thoughtful about some percentage of your time intentionally cultivating this like diverse set of people that can really accelerate these things that you want to do. Let me in there. What's up next? We're done. Drinks and it's over.
That's it. We're going to hang out and chat for a little bit longer, but thanks for everyone bearing with us. Went a bit long, but it was awesome. So thank you very much, Evan. Thank you for your time.
Is there a poll where they kind of score how we did, or
Is that how you want to do it?
I want to beat Brett Hurt. I just want to score higher.
Okay, let's take a poll. How
Just
did Evan do?
Just kidding. Let's hang out. It's funny that
He gives him a 10.
yeah. Sadly, it was out of 100, so that's a bummer. Let's hang out. It's weird that we're using mics still.
All right,
Cool.
let's
Take my
wrap
mic.
up.
Okay, now it's all brand in. Do it? Yeah. Did I remote this? Yeah, it's good. Thank you. Yeah, good stuff. You got a deck you're working on right now? I got four decks. Yeah. Good. I think a deck is kind of interesting. It's just like an artifact of the company. Like, it's just kind of really it's not I think like organizing the house. I was like, I got this template. It's almost like business model generation.
I just worked with him basically. So this is what we were during the day and everything else, weekends and at night.